Hi, people. Hi, Drew. I can see you. I'll wait for C. Reiter and then we will begin. Hi,
Hello.
C. Can you
Hi.
hear me, C?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
So we'll just wait 2 more minutes and then we can begin.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll do the reading. The takeover of Wild Rumpus's Instagram.
Yeah. And this is what going to be. So we'll do the reading and then the Q&As.
Perfect. Sounds
Okay.
good to me. Are you ready, C?
Yes, I am.
All right. Hello, all. This is Kalia Gang with C. Reiter. We put out this book, The Shared Room. This is just came out last Tuesday, so this is really exciting. I want to thank Wild Rumpus for letting us take over their Instagram to do a live reading. After the reading, C and I will both be available to answer any questions that you may have. Um, but this book, I'm incredibly proud of it. It came out of a very sad necessity. You know, this book was inspired by the drowning of a little girl, a Hmong girl on the east side of St. Paul. I am also a child of the east side of St. Paul. She was 6 years old. Her mom and dad were good friends of mine, and she told me once that when she grew up, she wanted to be a writer. Not just any writer, but she wanted to be like this writer. It was devastating when she drowned 3 years ago. After her death, I witnessed the grieving of her family, and I wanted to do something for her brothers and sisters. In the world of picture books, we like to celebrate joy and happiness and all of these lighter emotions, the good times. But it is much harder to find books that deal with grief in realistic ways. And so with the permission of her family, I wrote a draft of The Shared Room. And I said it would be a gift for her brothers and sisters, and I would only do it with permission. Um, so I wrote a draft. I shared it with her mom and her dad and her siblings, and they were all tremendously moved. Her mother said to me that the hardest thing about losing a child is that nobody knows how to talk about it. At school, it's easier for the teachers to proceed as if she had never been than to talk about her leaving. In families, among relatives, the same was true. Nobody knew what to do with their immense sadness. Before our current moment, I would have said that this book was perfect it was written especially for children who had lost other children. But in the moment that we live in, I think that this is an incredibly important book for processing and understanding grief. We see people on the streets, what happens inside of walls, through doors. So yeah, I'm going to start doing a reading from The Shared Room. I'll try to hold up the images after I'm done reading. Um, and then I'll introduce C. Reiter, my illustrator, who's also here with me to say a few words. And then we'll do a Q&A. The Shared Room by Kalia Yang, illustrations by C. Reiter. For the children who miss and grieve and love those who have gone. For the siblings of Gianna, Lili, Tiku, Duali, and the new baby, Lucia, her sister always and forever. It was a balmy winter day in Minnesota. The sky was heavy with gray clouds. The snow had begun to melt, and patches of yellow grass peeked through the dirty white. The ice grew thin over puddles of dark water and cracked like broken glass. In an old house on the east side of St. Paul, a mother and father sat before a dark fireplace with their 3 children playing. Excuse me. In an old house on the east side of St. Paul, a mother and father sat before a dark fireplace with their 3 children playing close by. They kept the light dim in the house. The shadows from the corners reached out and touched the feet of the children. The light entered the room from a single wide window and a picture on the wall. The window looked out at a red stop sign where neighborhood children waited for the bus in a long line on school days. On the wall there was a picture of their 4th child, another daughter, smiling beneath the summer sun, her brown hair glinting with streaks of gold, her eyes soft and dreamy, her mouth open in joy, white teeth in a fine row. 7 months had passed since the girl in the picture had drowned. The day she died had been hot and sweaty. The family had gone to the swimming lake. Bright umbrellas unfolded on sand like flowers in bloom. Elderly people read their newspapers and books on lounge chairs and towels. Young men and women played volleyball nearby. No one saw the little girl walk into the water, laugh when the water touched her toes with its cool, walk further into the lake, feel the water around her waist, walk until her feet lost touch with the ground, float for a moment, and then struggle to surface. The day she died now existed as a bubble above all the other days on the family's calendar, a fragile and fierce floating thing untethered to the earth, well below the clouds, but beyond anyone's reach. Her room Her room had remained empty, her clothes in their drawers, the pictures she had drawn at school still taped on the walls, her bed, her blanket, her sheets, her pillow still held her scent and the dents she had made in them. Several times a day the mother or the father opened the door to their daughter's room, went in, sat on the floor beside the bed, leaned their head into the sheets and the blanket, sniffed deep, closed their eyes, and sometimes hoped never to wake again. But then the 3 other children called up from the stairs, and no matter how tired the mother or the father would respond, "I'm coming," a quiet had entered the house. No matter how loud the boys became or how hard the younger girl laughed or cried, there seemed a sound barrier over the family. A hush like winter had settled in their home. Sometimes the quiet got too loud and the mother and the father played videos of the girl singing on their phones. The brothers and sister clambered close to watch the image flickering across their screens. A little girl from a happier time, laughing and dancing, singing loud, let it go, with her hands raised high above her head, her steps taking her further and further beyond the screen. The oldest boy was 10. He had shared a room with his younger brother for as long as he could remember. He thought that it would stay like this until everyone grew up and moved away. He did the math. The house had 3 bedrooms. One bedroom was for the mother and the father and the baby's sister. One was for the sister who had drowned. And the last one was for himself and his brother. He knew old houses didn't grow new rooms easily, and so he believed that he would always share a room with his younger brother. One warm January day, as he was drawing by himself in the light of the window, his mother said quietly, "Do you want your sister's room?" He looked at his parents sitting on low stools before the dark fireplace. His mother was looking at him closely. He stammered, "Yes." She said, "Tonight we'll move you in." He said, "Where am I going to sleep?" His father said, "In your sister's bed." He said, "Where am I going to put my clothes?" His father answered, "In her drawers." He had been sad, but he hadn't cried in front of his mother and father. He had comforted his younger brother and sister when they cried. He tried to answer their questions as best he could about where their sister was and why she would never return. Now the tightness in his chest was climbing up his throat, and no matter how hard he swallowed, he knew it would erupt. His next words came out in a cry and a question. "She's never coming back." His hands covered his eyes and his face, so all he saw was the water of his world spilling over in the dark of his closed palm. That night the mother and father and the boy took off the sheets from the sister's bed and put on new sheets. His mother went through her daughter's drawers and folded the clothes into an empty suitcase for the younger girl to wear in a couple of years. His father swept the room with a broom, and the girl's hair stuck on its tip. With his hands, he pulled her hair out from the bristles, and he held the dust and the strands of light hair tight in his palm. That night the big brother slept in his new room. He could see the neighborhood through his new window, and he saw how the world had looked to his sister from her place of rest, peaceful. Later that evening a winter storm blew in on the waves of the warm winds that had visited. Outside, the snow fell lightly at first, becoming increasingly heavy beneath the dark cover of night, until the flakes grew so thick that the street lamps disappeared from view. In the morning, the old house on the east side of St. Paul was covered in snow, and the family inside huddled close to their fireplace, now alight with flames, keeping each other warm, their little girl's memory, like the fire before them, a melt in the freeze of their hearts. After now I've written enough books and I've read aloud enough times to know that different books end and take us to a different place. Every time I read The Shared Room, I end up in such a quiet space, such a quiet room, one that is so familiar to me. I come from women who have lost children. My mother, my aunts, my grandmothers, they've all lost little ones. And so in writing the story of Jinnah and her family, I'm also writing the story of so many of the women who have raised me. Thank you all for listening to the reading. Now, C, would you like to talk a little bit about what this experience of illustrating for this book has been for you? I know that it is your first children's book. We are introducing to Literary America one of the first Hmong illustrators in the industry. So I'm really excited and thankful that we got to work together.
Thank you so much for the beautiful reading, Kalia. That was so beautiful. Oh my goodness. I never tire of reading the book. From the very first day that our editor, Eric, gave me the transcript, from that day forward, I still have that same copy. He's printed off several copies, but I still have that one because it was so iconic to me. And it was so memorable. The fact that you had asked me 2 years ago if I was interested, and we had just become Facebook friends for what, like 3 weeks or so. It was very short. And so not only was I very surprised, I was also taken aback. Like, Kalia trusts me to be able to follow through with the illustrations, and how can I do justice to such a beautiful transcript and such a beautiful story? So what I had to start off doing was to find the heart of the story, just read it over and over again, try to understand the heart of the story before I actually began a quest to finding a suitable visual look for the book. And so I settled on watercolors, excuse me, watercolors, because I felt like it was metaphoric for layering so many different emotions. It's undescribable, and I feel like people can picture it visually different, but that was my vision for it anyway. And another key component was just that I'm so intrigued by how kids think and their point of views. And so putting myself in the shoes of the characters, from the mother's point of view, from the father's point of view, that was all very detrimental to the illustrations for the book. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was tough for me at times. I cried a few times. I mean, some days it was hard for me to work on the book just because it was so emotional for me. And granted, I've never lost a child, but I know that illustrations, or whether it be even portraits, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the character. And so when it became hard for me, I had to come to a hard stop and then pick back up where I leave off. So yeah, it's been a wonderful journey coming along with you, Kalia.
Well, thank you so much for your courage. I've been waiting for you. I don't know if you know this. I come out with my first children's book, A Map into the World. I had this opportunity to work with Seo Kim, a wonderful illustrator, and I loved her work. But in the back of my mind, I was always thinking it would be so awesome to be able to collaborate with another Hmong artist. I know Hmong artists exist. I know the opportunities are hard to come by. And so it was really exciting when you said yes immediately, and to hear your enthusiasm for the project. Also, your deep feeling. I think we're both mothers, we should say this. We're also both residents of the east side of St. Paul. These spaces that do not make it very often into the world of children's literature. But it was so important for me to get these things right. And so I'm so appreciative of you. We have opportunity. If anybody has questions, please type it in, and C and I are happy to answer. But while you're thinking of any questions or any comments that you'd like to share, C, I have a question for you. Which is your favorite illustration from the book?
I think it's the turning point of the book for me, really. I spent a lot of time on this particular spread. It's very simple. And I also had a discussion with Eric about, hey, instead of doing a full spread, can we do the text on one page and then focus in on this picture? And it was of the brother in the book when he was given the room of his sister. That to me, his crying face, And I also did kind of like a wash. Yes, that's the one. That's the one. And if I focus in it long enough, I'm going to cry. But to me, it's just raw emotions. It's just like that pivotal scene in a movie where it's just a turning point. Okay, well, it may not be action, it may not be fire, it may not be crazy stuff happening, but that alone, and like you said, you mentioned earlier, Kalia, it's like being alone in your thoughts. It's like reaching within yourself to find that pain that you can not necessarily hold on to, but you have to acknowledge it in order to let go of it. And that was my favorite one.
I found it really powerful as well. So I could have perhaps guessed your favorite one. But thank you for answering. We have one question. How did we come to find each other? So I am no longer on Facebook, but I was on Facebook. And on Facebook, I had about 5,000 friends that I exchanged in and out casually. But see, one day I saw her art. You had these portraits that you put up, and it was of I think, your mother with chickens pecking at the ground. And then I went to your portfolio, and I saw all these images that I found tremendously moving and undeniably Hmong. The features of your characters, the features of the people you were portraying, the food, and the lifestyle. And I thought this would be so cool in a children's book. But I agree. I don't believe that. I don't believe in coincidences. I think that these things are meant to be. And, but it was wonderful when I reached out to you. You were so enthusiastic. You wrote back immediately. And then it was a conversation between me and Eric Anderson, our editor at the University of Minnesota Press. And I want to say this here. I've worked with several editors now, and they're all wonderful in different ways. But the University of Minnesota Press believes in the work that I do from a different place. I think because now I've worked with small independent publishers, large New York publishers, and then a variety of local publishers. Not at all. I'm so appreciative of a press that has the courage to publish the kind of books like The Shared Room. I have another book from them, What God is Honored Here, Writings on Miscarriage and Infant Loss. And again, these are essential and necessary books, but they're not the kind of books that a lot of your corporate presses would be interested in. And so I really want to do a shout out to the University of Minnesota Press for taking risk, but also believing in its artists and its writers and the work that we believe we are born to do. This is such a book for me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been a joy working with Eric. It's been a joy working with the U of M Press. You know, it was it was the first time for me, and it was a very challenging moment because I knew that I could see the final product, but to get there, there were required steps. And so it took a lot of patience, and this is actually one of the longest term projects I've ever worked on. Most projects I work on is usually anywhere from, like, I don't know, like a day to like 6 months or so. But this was 2 years in the making, and on top of that, there were other things that I was working on too. I think that it was amazing. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience, not only because I was given the freedom with the creativity portion of it. Eric also helped guide me through and continued to encourage me from day one until, even now. It's amazing. So thank you.
He's a wonderful mentor. So there was a question about my favorite spread, and my favorite spread is this one. It's also the spread that the press decided to use for the back cover. I love the subtlety of the spread. I love the fact that you, instead of showing the little girl dancing away, that we see the look on her family as they're looking upon her image. I think this is so true to grief, so true to these situations that nobody wants to be in, and yet it is so profoundly human. So this is my favorite spread. When the family is missing the girl together. There was also another question about whether we plan to collaborate together again. In many ways, we have. When I invited C to do the shared room, I also was leading a group of artists to do this programming for TPT. It's the art is, and in our case, art is our call for peace. C was the visual artist I invited on board because I so appreciated her work, but also I believe she has something to say. You know, C, I think, and you can correct me, C, if I'm off, but I think you find art very meditative and calming, and in that way very peaceful. And so it made sense to me, if art is indeed our call for peace, if that is the reason why I write, then is it not also what she's looking for in her medium? And so we have collaborated together outside of this project. But I'm interested right now at this point in my career in working with all kinds of folk and granting opportunities where possible. So next year, my University of Minnesota Press children's book is illustrated by a mutual friend of ours, Billy Tao, who is a young Hmong artist. And when I emailed him about that opportunity and asked if he was interested, the email back was, he said, "You're the prayer that I've been waiting for." You know, I've been writing for professionally since I was 22, pursuing this life as a writer. Finally, I'm at a point where I can offer opportunities to members of my community who need it desperately. And so Billy Tao illustrates the next one. And then I have a different book from Carol Rhoda, and I actually have the book on hand to show, so I can do a sneak reveal of that one. This is my October book. This one comes out on October 6th. It is called The Most Beautiful Thing, and I think it's gorgeous. I'll show one portrait from it. So this is the illustrations in the book. This one was supposed to be launched at the Walker, but in the world that we live in, I don't know if that's possible anymore. But by the end of this, I will work with all kinds of illustrators, and I'm sure that C and our paths will cross again and again. Another question: when did you decide to share the story of grief as a book for children? What does it mean to you to share these heavy emotions with children? I'll answer and then you can answer, C. Does that sound good?
Sure, absolutely.
As a child, I was born in a refugee camp. The number one cause of death in the place where I was born was suicide. Growing up, there was no room, no space, no way for my mother or father to protect me from the realities of our life. Every time somebody died, the others would cry, "Why are you dying here in this place that does not want you? Get up so we can go home." Home was a place I'd never known. When I asked the adults in my life, it was a story of Laos before the war in the Thai mountains. When I asked my mom and my dad, it was some imagined future across the far ocean. You know, growing up in poverty in America, I knew exactly why there were no fruits in our house. Mom and dad couldn't afford it. There were weeks when we ate only bones because the price of meat was too high. I grew up with the heavy emotions. My mom and dad raised me with the truth of our circumstances. They couldn't shield me or protect me, and rather they focused their energy on helping me understand why things were the way they were and how to navigate these hard situations. My father would look at us and he would say, "You are not poor children because your hearts are not poor places." And I believed him. You know, and so I know that children feel all of our emotions, the deep, the heavy, the dark ones. So for me, it wasn't, the question was never should I do it. It was could I do it, and could I do it well? Could I do it responsibly? As an adult for both children and adults, I know that when I'm writing for adults, you know, the fire is lit. If they're going to pick up my book, they already love the world of stories, the world of literature, the world of art. But for a child, it's a very different experience. You know, I'm building a fire. I feel like I'm blowing breath into kindles, lighting ambers, and trying to light a fire for all of their lives. It's a very different responsibility. So for me, I was thinking, for all those lonely children, for all those grieving children, for all of those children curious about grief, it's not some sweetly washed narrative, but a very real experience of grief. How do I tell them they're not alone? How do I tell my own children what grieving families look like? Those were the guiding questions for me. And so it was a question of how I would do it. Could I do it? I don't shy away from anything. And I think that is a product of the way I was raised. See?
You know, as you talk about that, it really rings true to my upbringing. You know, as a first generation Hmong American, I grew up in Fresno, California, and we had a cousin or two cousins that we played with regularly. And this was the very first loss that I had experienced. But I didn't know it was a loss because, like you mentioned, our parents shielded us from things like that culturally because they didn't know whether we could handle or not, or the fact that they were grieving and they didn't really have the time or energy to explain it to us. I just remember a very dark time during that loss. No one actually sat me down and told me about it. It wasn't until I want to say 20 years later, it was still weighing on my mind. I'm a very visual person as an artist, if you can imagine. And so I just kept playing this scene of what I heard the adults talking about over and over again. And so for me to be able to illustrate what that meant for me, the pain and being, you know, the mystery and being in the dark about things, and then coming of age, learning the reality of loss, you know, the emotions of loss. I really truly reached into that part of myself and poured that part of myself into the illustrations for this book. So that was my experience, at least.
You know, last night I did a reading through the St. Paul Public Libraries on the shared room, and one of the young Hmong women commented, and she said, I wish I had this book when I was growing up because this book makes me feel less lonely. And I said, why? And she said, because my mom and dad, they were suffering from PTSD. There was no word for that kind of grief, for that kind of loneliness that governs so much of our life. But in the hush of the home that you've drawn, I could feel the home of my childhood coming alive again. And that's a book that I want my children to have and to know. And I hadn't thought about that. But for so many of us, first generation refugee children, we grew up in homes full of the adults suffering from PTSD and other undiagnosed mental health issues. And there is a great deal of sadness to that experience as well. You know, I'm still, uh, I've learned this much. Every time a book comes out, you're beginning to and it's in the hand of readers when there's a live audience. My own experience to the book changes and it grows in directions that I could not have imagined or foreseen. And that is really the gift of this whole thing. You know, in this culture, in white American culture, there's always a question of what kids can and can't handle. Um, that's a very privileged position because so many parents cannot afford to shield and have no room and space to shield their kids from such realities. And I think in this moment right now, we're beginning to have that national conversation. And so this is a hard book, but it is a hard book for the hard times. I want all of our kids to be able to sit with sadness, to walk through sorrow with grace and with dignity. There are no shortcuts to emotions. Like my grandma used to say, there are no shortcuts to emotions, Mainai. I think she was absolutely right. Once in a while, people say, you're so strong. How did you become so strong? It is their truths that have granted me the strength I have to live this life. And I think it is the same for you, see?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we grew up around my grandma and my grandpa both, and to also experience the loss of my both grandparents was hard as well. And you know, and even though they were in their, you know, I mean, they were older, as opposed to the cousins that I lost when we were little. I mean, they were probably, you know, 7 and 8. You know, it's the same no matter what the loss is, who they were to you. It's the same. It's the same kind of pain. You know, it takes a while, it takes time, and I don't know if you'll ever get over it. You know, it's just like you said. I mean, you have to experience it in your own ways, and you know, just let it carry you to where it takes you. You know, and I think that this book is definitely needed in order to help other people.
Does anybody else have any questions for us? See, and I could go on talking forever. You know, we've been in quarantine for a long time, so this conversation could go on in many directions. But if any of you have any questions, please feel free. Do you have any questions for me, C? I'll end this this live stream at 4:40, so we have 8 minutes left. Do you have any questions for me, C?
Um, I, I truly want to hear more about after the book was finished and you delivered a copy to Sai, the mother of Gia, who the little girl's mother is. The book is dedicated to.
That was so. Um, I wanted to give one of the first copies to the family. We were already in quarantine when we went. When I wrote her and I said the book is done and I want to give you a copy. She sent me her address, so I went to the house and I knew I couldn't leave it on the ground. I could hear somebody gardening in the backyard, so I walked around the backyard and there she was. It was a beautiful bright day. There was a crabapple tree in bloom, a tiny little crabapple tree in bloom, and her whole yard was a huge garden, mung vegetables beginning to unfurl. And I said, "Here's the book," and I handed it to her, and she dropped the gardening hoe she had in her hand, and she held the book to her heart. And I didn't know what to say for a quiet, for a minute. She just held the book, and I just stood there with her. And then I said, when this is over, I want to give you a hug. When you write a book that is very specific in nature and thus very universal, um, and if you're a professional writer like me, there are critics who have a lot of things to say. Whether this book is suitable for children or whatever it is, whether the words are, I use too many or not enough, there are a lot of critical responses. But hers was the response that I was most concerned about. And hers was the response that I most needed in order to do the work of carrying this book into the world. So when
Beautiful.
this is all over, we will give each other big hugs.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful, Kalia. I actually met Sai for the very first time right before we started quarantine. We had just returned from Vegas, and Melissa Vang, a mutual friend of ours, who introduced me to Sai, because we had gotten together and we were talking about the book, and I told her about it, and she said, "I know Sai. She's at we all work together." And I thought, oh my goodness, like I'm nervous about this, because then all of a sudden I was already too deep into the book to think, am I doing justice to their family? And so, I mean, even the first thought that I had when I first started was, do I illustrate their family exactly the way it is? And I thought, no, I don't need to do that, because pain is universal. Loss is universal. It doesn't necessarily have to be the family. I went with, characters that would portray such a family, a Hmong family. I went with, along with the ages, but it's not necessarily their portraits that were the characters that influenced it. And so it was tough for me, wondering the whole time, have I done justice to your writing, and have I done justice to their family? And I think that when I met Sai and we talked about it, she gave me the courage that yes, it is, and that she was happy that we went, we worked on it, and that we're finding an outlet for their family as well.
Thank you for sharing that. There was a question for you. Somebody wanted to know, see, if this is your first children's book.
Hi, Meg. This is my very first children's book, and I have a couple things in line, maybe related, but I can't quite disclose yet. Yes, definitely, it's been a great journey, and I absolutely love it.
I think unless anybody has any questions, I'll close up. I want to thank you for joining us. This is the small, intimate group. If this were in person, I think we could have an incredible conversation. As is, I'm very thankful for this opportunity. Thank you to Wall Rumpus, always championing both the hard books and the easy books for children, the books that children need in order to live and to dream and to be strong for the world that we all belong to. So thank you, Kara and Drew, for enabling this. Thank you, C, for the gift of your time, not only in the drawing illustrating that you did for the book, but in life. It's nice to have somebody to carry a book with into the world.
Thank you so much, Kalia. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good evening, all of you.
Thank you for joining, everyone.